Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The weather may be getting colder, but the Brexit process is hotting up. A European Council meeting in 2 weeks will decide whether Britain gets to the next level in the talks. That is, whether we get to discuss trade and our future relationship. We've made concessions on the money issue. Fair to say that's no impediment to moving on now. But there is still the not insignificant issue of the Irish border. It's a circle to be squared. The UK does not want to be in the customs union or the single market, but that would normally imply we have borders with those who are. The land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic included. Now, everybody agrees that a physical border, is not a good idea there, but no one's really suggested how you avoid it in a way that's acceptable to everyone else. We'll hear from the Irish Agriculture Minister shortly, but first our diplomatic editor Mark Urban reports from the currently invisible border itself.
This is how the modern lumber business is done. Load trees in one end, get planks out of the other. The transformation takes just 12 minutes. It all runs with such sharp efficiency that the mill works day and night, 365 days a year. This plant near Enniskillen in Northern Ireland uses mainly logs from the Republic. Put a hard border in the way of that, and all its precisely calculated margins would go awry.
Now, we have 23,000 cross-border commercial lorry movements every year. And you can imagine how much time would be lost if we started to lose an hour or a half an hour of time on those. We have 300 direct employees here in Enniskillen, maybe another 300 indirect. If we lost an hour a day or an hour on each truck movement, that would equate to about 15 new people, and the efficiency of the business would be badly impaired.
Years of tranquility and political progress here mean that in many places the border is barely discernible. So we're on the road here to Clones in County Fermanagh, and this road actually passes the border 4 times in the space of 10 minutes. This type of ease of traffic is the thing that's being threatened by current developments. So back in the Troubles, the army closed many border crossing points, and people who want the border to carry on working in this very unrestricted way say that if measures are put in place to control it again, whether that's remote control cameras or customs officers, those could easily become the focus for protest or even violence by those opposed to any tightening of control. But with the EU heading for a summit where 2 out of the 3 of its key Brexit separation issues, money and citizens' rights, appear to be close to resolution, the Irish border question has suddenly gained great power.
This is the first time in the entire history of Anglo-Irish relations when you have had a conflict between Britain and Ireland, when Ireland has been in the stronger position. It's never happened before. It's a very unfamiliar kind of territory for us to be in. And it's a huge challenge for Ireland because we're not used to having that kind of power in our side of Anglo-Irish relations. And we have to use it really, really well. We have a fairly short period in which it can be used. And if it's used badly, it's a disaster for Ireland, but also for Britain, and that's no good for any of us.
And if Ireland takes too strong a line and contributes to a disorderly Brexit, one without an agreement, its economy would suffer heavily.
Any sector or any company that has, supply chains that span the north and south. So there are a lot of complications for firms, which I think they're beginning to grapple with and beginning to look at in a more granular sense as they prepare for Brexit. But these will have real impacts on companies and potentially will be very disruptive.
In Dublin, politicians want maximum concessions for business while keeping peace in the form of the Good Friday Agreement intact. But if their favoured solution, retaining Northern Ireland as part of the EU's customs union, is to take flight, Loyalists in the north will have to be convinced that that's not pushing them towards a united Ireland.
The constitutional position can only be changed if there's a referendum on a united Ireland, and that's contained in the Good Friday Agreement. And of course we're campaigning for that. We want to see that referendum and we want to win that referendum. And this is just a practical measure.
So what can the UK say, short of keeping the North in the customs union, to convince Ireland it should allow Brexit talks to move on?
We have not had sufficient detail from the United Kingdom government when it comes to the border. We had a fine speech from Prime Minister May in Florence, and we had a lengthy position paper, but neither of which had any decent level of detail. The Irish government have put out the sensible proposal in relation to a new customs union. We want to make sure that we have something similar, or at least as advanced, from the UK government.
Back in Fermanagh, what they want is a minimum of disruption to their supply chain and a special status for the North that might not be called customs union, but could look remarkably similar to it. Solving the border issue will require some sort of special regime that isn't such an example of Irish exceptionalism that it falls foul of the bureaucrats in Brussels. Ireland is using its window of opportunity to press the UK for answers, but with wider EU-UK agreement apparently close, the pressure is being felt on both sides of the Irish border for a workable roadmap to solve their issues.
Mark Urban there. Well, Nick Watt is our political editor and is here. So, Nick, it's been a busy couple of days with the money thing yesterday. Northern Ireland, a lot to say there. Let's just start on the money. Are we clearer about exactly where the deal is and what's been promised?
Well, we were saying last night that the UK and the EU have reached agreement on a framework, but that when if there is a written agreement, you won't actually see a sum of money written down. But I understand that if we get to that agreement, either in the run-up to or actually at the European Council early next month, the two sides will agree a figure, it won't be in writing, and that figure will emerge. And the UK view is that that figure will be between 40 to 45 billion pounds, with an absolute cap that it cannot go above 45 billion pounds. And that will be 40 billion of money that is absolutely related to the EU, and what I'm told is a couple of extra billion in money that is not wholly definitively related to the EU, but will essentially go into that
That
pot.
was pounds you were using, because a lot of the figures yesterday we were talking about were euros, which was so 45 billion, call it 50 billion euros. OK, Northern Ireland. Does the UK government believe it can see a way through this?
Well, the UK government believes this is now the most difficult issue. I was talking to one senior source who said we hope to get there by the time of the summit, but it is a gamble. Now, I understand that the UK is planning a carrot and a stick approach with Dublin. The stick is to say, you claim that we are not abiding by the principles of the Good Friday Agreement. Actually, you're not abiding by it, because what you are doing is solely representing the nationalist community, which has real fears about Brexit. And actually, at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement is you need to take both communities with you, and unionists obviously voted mainly in favour of leave in the referendum. So that is the stick.
That's the stick.
The carrot is to say, let's take the cooperation across the island of Ireland that is in the Good Friday Agreement, let's entrench them in this agreement with the EU, let's build on them, and the two big areas are agriculture, where there's all Ireland on animal health, and a single energy market. And what UK ministers are going to say is, we reckon we could sell that to the DUP, because the DUP until earlier this year was in government with Sinn Féin, governing on these all-Ireland issues. We can sell it to them. What we cannot sell to them is putting a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain down the Irish Sea.
Nick, thanks. Well, we hear a lot of the British view, but earlier this evening I spoke to Michael Creed, the Irish Agriculture Minister, and I started by asking him how the Irish border issue could be resolved in Brexit talks.
Well, we have articulated what we believe is a reasonable position to resolve the issue. The UK has clearly set its face against that, and that our suggestion was that Northern Ireland should remain within the customs union and the single market.
Right. So
what
that's
is clearly
out.
incumbent on
that we know that one's
well, what's
out.
clearly
Go on. So
we
what happens
understand
then?
that.
Yeah.
What's clearly incumbent on Theresa May and her government and her negotiating team is to articulate an alternative which doesn't give rise to a hard border, because everybody has agreed we do not want a hard border. Not just for trade reasons, but because of the long lessons of history that we have learnt to our great cost, not just financially, but indeed at higher cost over many, many years. The Good Friday Agreement, the single market and the customs union have facilitated a seamless border over many years.
Okay, so
if the UK government has clearly said no to a single market and customs union, it is clearly incumbent on the British government to articulate a way forward that enables us to have an invisible, seamless border, which they have said they want.
Let me put this to you. Suppose the British said, we think we've got a solution, but it does rely on us checking 1 in 100 trucks as they go across the border. Would that be acceptable to the Irish government?
Well, look, you and I aren't going to negotiate the detail of it. There are teams of negotiators on behalf of the UK government and the Barnier negotiating team. It's not a bilateral agreement between the Republic of Ireland and the UK. It's an agreement between the UK and the 27 member states. And the 27 are rock solid ad idem on this issue. And we need political solutions now. And we're not getting those political solutions from the UK government.
What if there was a big lorry park inside Northern Ireland where some checks were made? Does that constitute a physical border that is unacceptable, or is that compatible with the kind of no border rhetoric we're hearing?
That is not compatible with an invisible, seamless border.
Right.
But it is a very interesting premise to your question, which is the UK citizens, and I respect their vote, voted to leave the European Union, but they did not of necessity vote in the implementation of that decision to vote to leave the customs union or the single market. That's an entirely different interpretation of the issue. My concern is, with all of the historical connotations with a border, if they were to re-emerge, that's something that's violently destructive to the interests of the Republic and citizens of Northern Ireland. And that's why, also in the context of trade, anything that's an impediment to trade, no matter what political hat you wear, is to the detriment of citizens north and south.
Would your Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, would he survive if he made significant concessions on the position you were describing? It's not a strong government in the Republic at the moment. Would he survive? Would he be able to command majority support if he made concessions?
I don't, propose to speak authoritatively for other political parties in the Republic, but I am pretty certain that there is virtual 100% agreement across the political divide on the issue of the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland. This is a really, really critical issue. It is far, far more important than the trade context between North and South on the island of Ireland. It has to do with the difficult historical lessons that we have learnt that have been born out of a hard border. And we certainly want to avoid that. And that is our primary motivation. Obviously, trade issues that arise and costs associated with a border are important, but they are secondary to the lessons of history.
Michael Creed, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan.
The Democratic Unionist Party has threatened to withdraw its support for Theresa May's minority government if there's any kind of special deal between Northern Ireland and the EU. It's in response to efforts to try to break the deadlock over how to continue free movement between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. At present, thousands of people and millions of pounds of goods cross the border every day. With 16 months to go until Brexit, our Ireland correspondent Chris Buckler is at Ochnacloy on the Irish border. And Chris, so far this has been proving an intractable problem and time's running out to resolve it.
Yeah, in the first phase of Brexit negotiations, the Irish border is proving the most difficult problem to solve, and that is partly because of the sheer scale of it. This is one of the 300 crossing points between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Bridges and roads that connect the two together. Now, what do you do whenever all of a sudden one part is in the EU and the other one is outside? Well, the European Union has put forward one answer. It says that Northern Ireland could stick to its trading rules even if the rest of the UK doesn't. Perhaps even stay inside the customs union and the single market. Now, some say that would offer real opportunity for the economy here. But unionists are angry. And they say they'll withdraw their support for the Conservative government at Westminster if they even consider it. On the island of Ireland, culture does not recognise borders, and neither do people. The uilleann pipes are one of the traditional sounds of this land, and in his workshop that sits just a mile from where Northern Ireland meets the Republic, Martin Gallen makes the pipes. He is closely watching the slow negotiations to try to carve out a deal that will see the UK leave the EU. And he fears it will mean a return of checks on the Irish border.
They're on the way promising that there'll be no hardening of the border, but I honestly can't see how they're going to stand by that promise.
The European Union doesn't want a return of customs posts on the border bridges and roads that connect Northern Ireland and the Republic. It's been offering the chance for Northern Ireland to stay inside the customs union and single market, even if the rest of the UK leaves. That's the fury of unionists who support the Conservatives rely on at Westminster.
If there is any hint that in order to placate Dublin and the EU, they're prepared to have Northern Ireland treated differently than the rest of the United Kingdom, then they can't rely on our vote, because they have undertaken an agreement with us, our votes, for their support for the Union.
That's a fear of a move towards a united Ireland, and it would probably mean new checks for ships crossing the Irish Sea, effectively creating a border between two parts of the UK. But there could be benefits for Northern Ireland's troubled economy. This border business park was opened in 2013 using £6 million of public money. 4 years on, all 22 acres lie largely empty. Last month, one firm did finally sign up to take a site here.
With an opportunity that
and others might be more likely to follow after Brexit, if being based here meant you could trade either within the EU or as part of the UK.
Just as we have for our people, we can choose identity, whether it be British or Irish, our products can be exactly the same. And if we take this opportunity, we become probably one of the most attractive investment locations anywhere in the world.
No one wants new barriers in the cities and towns that sit all along this border. And the Irish government are still prepared to stand in the path of trade talks to ensure that.
This is a historic moment, and we are not going to allow the re-emergence of a physical border on this island. And the European Union will support us on that. So there is going to be no need to use a veto.
That does sound, though, that if you had to use a veto, you would be prepared to use it.
Well, the EU side, in my view, will not progress phase 2 unless we make sufficient progress in all three areas.
And it's the border that is the sticking point at this point?
The border is the sticking point.
Ireland's uilleann pipes were once known as the Union Pipes. But no one is sure of the consequences once this island is at the edge of two unions, both the EU and the UK. Chris Buckler, BBC News, at the Irish border.
Welcome to Dublin's Convention Centre, a futuristic hub in the regenerated Docklands area. This glass palace hosted the Queen during her first state visit here just 6 years ago. Now the governments of both Britain and Ireland are in a standoff over the Irish border and what will happen post-Brexit in just 2 years' time. Today, word that the deadlock might be easing. Newspaper reports suggest that Britain might offer Northern Ireland extra devolved powers to avoid differing regulations across the island of Ireland, even if the rest of the UK abandons European rules. But almost as soon as that news broke, the DUP warned the Prime Minister that she couldn't rely on their support to prop up her government if Northern Ireland is treated differently to the rest of the UK. So, can a deal be done ahead of Monday's all-important meeting between Theresa May and the EU President Jean-Claude Juncker? Or will Ireland's insistence of a guarantee of no hard border continue to block Brexit talks? Tonight, we bring together interested parties from England, Northern Ireland and here in the Republic to debate the key issues. But first, I went to speak to businesses who work on both sides of the border in Monaghan in the Republic of Ireland and Armagh in Northern Ireland, to ask them what the prospect of a hard border would mean for their businesses. Hard border, soft border or no border, it's all on the agenda. A relic of the past, a derelict customs post ignored by the roaring traffic. This sums up the reality of the invisible border today between the Republic and Northern Ireland. Unfettered fluidity. So if you're looking for dawn, you obviously won't find it here, but here. 10 minutes drive from the border, Combi Lift, makers of bespoke forklift trucks, thriving and expanding. They've just spent 46 million euros on a gigantic new factory. They're in the Republic, but 10% of their workforce comes from Northern Ireland. A quarter of their exports end up in the UK.
There's a huge cloud in this area around Brexit. You know, the uncertainty and the unknown factor is a challenge. You know, as I say, I've a family, you know, 3 young boys and a wife that you know, were supported through the success of Combi Lift here. I would hope that you know, this hard border, if in fact it happens, wouldn't have the challenges, but I do have the fear that would obviously impede in our business.
If the government in London was listening to you, what would you say to them?
I say, look, again, we're a huge importer and exporter of product to the UK. You know, we rely on the UK as our home market. We need to make that movement of product as easy as it is currently in today's market.
The green, untroubled pastures of an open border. It's what they want. It's what everybody wants in London, Dublin, Belfast or Brussels. But how to achieve that while Britain insists on leaving the European Customs Union requires a solution still as remote as the cathedral spire of Monaghan. Much of it depends on the Democratic Unionist Party, whose 10 MPs are propping up Theresa May's minority government in London. I sat down with their assembly member in Armagh. So everyone has a vested interest in keeping the border as seamless and open as possible.
Absolutely.
So haven't you shot yourself in the foot by voting not just for Brexit, but also to opt out of the customs union?
No, I don't see it that way at all. I think as someone that voted for Brexit, as someone that believes in Brexit and believes that we should be a free country, I mean, I'm all on for friendliness with all our European neighbours. I have no issue with that. But there has been an issue over a number of years where we feel that we've been dictated to by the European Union.
The Taoiseach Leo Varadkar stands up, as he has done, and says we want a written guarantee there won't be a hard border before we allow everyone to move on to the next phase of trade talks in Brussels.
Yeah.
What's your response to that?
I think he's very foolish. I think he's not negotiating. You have to negotiate the border that you want and have with your neighbours. I mean, I think what he's...
But all he wants is a written guarantee there won't be a hard border. I mean, but you don't want to see a hard border.
Well, he doesn't want to see a hard border. We've said in the UK government, doesn't want a hard border. No one wants a hard border.
But then we're fine. You write the written guarantee, there won't be a hard border, and then you can move on to the next stage.
But, I mean, that weakens any negotiation. You know, if you start writing written guarantees...
Well, why not? It's something you agree with.
Something we agree with. But, I mean, I still think that we must negotiate and ensure we have the right deal.
So this is where a Northern Irish border guard would have stood once upon a time, checking traffic and documents as people try to get from one side to the other. Now, frankly, it is really hard to imagine this derelict ruin springing back to life as a border post. But that's what would have to happen if this was indeed going to be another hard border after Brexit. And remember, there are more than 250 crossing points like this between the Republic and Northern Ireland. On to Lackpatrick, one of the biggest dairy companies in the UK and Ireland, straddling the border in every sense. Milk curdling and trucks waiting to clear customs is an obvious worry. But the boss, a former soldier, has another.
I would have patrolled the southern side of the border, and the British Army would be on the other side, and we wanted to make sure we weren't shooting up each other and so forth. Because you had a border, it was a security border, you had big disparities in prices. Once you have a big disparity, you give a great incentive for the illegal economy to take off, and that is at the cost to the legitimate economy.
So you can't imagine going back to those bad old days?
No, absolutely.
Nor can anyone else. But history lingers on the horizon in these parts. How not to rouse it, that is the challenge posed here by Brexit. Well, I'm joined now by political editor Gary Gibbon in London. Gary, what more can you tell us about today's developments?
Well, on paper today, the Prime Minister looked like she was facing a pretty potentially lethal pincer movement. We knew the Irish government, potentially with EU allies, was considering perhaps scuppering the idea of the December Council opening up phase 2 of the talks if they weren't satisfied with guarantees that were given by Britain. And then today you hear voices within the Democratic Unionist Party turning round and saying, well, actually, if you, the British government, lean in too much to Dublin, we'll walk away. And of course, the 10 DUP MPs are what keeps Theresa May in power. Now, all of that sounds immensely threatening. I have to say, talking to British government ministers, I think they have internalised, as it were, the thinking of the DUP. They know exactly what their red lines are. They know that they must do nothing, as far as the DUP are concerned, that challenges the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. They're acutely aware of that. That's in their thinking all the time. So none of this talk today comes as a surprise. And I think you get the feeling in Whitehall that they feel that the government in Dublin is not going to want to press too hard for an absolutely clear outline on where things are going in terms of north, south and the border in that December summit, because they don't want that summit failing, because it could mean enormous pressure under Theresa May for the government to walk away from the Brexit talks, a domino effect towards no deal, and that brings enormous harm towards Ireland. So I think what we're looking at now is officials in London, Dublin and Brussels trying to use some of that ambiguous language which did so much to help with the Northern Ireland peace agreement to come up with a piece of paper, preferably ready for Monday when Theresa May goes to Brussels to meet Jean-Claude Juncker, which both London and the DUP can wave around and which Dublin can wave around. Now, their abilities at ambiguous language have recently been tested and seem to have been proved quite strong, because one of the components in the preparations for the December summit is the divorce bill. And just recently, of course, we've seen that London and Brussels have managed to come up with lists of commitments that London will have to pay up on, but come to two completely different totals at the bottom of those lists. So maybe that's a good omen of where these talks will go.
Indeed. Thanks, Gary. Right, let's introduce the panel. Joining me now here in Dublin, Nicola Byrne, President of the Irish Exporters Association, Editor of Brexit Central, Ben Lowry, Jonathan Isaby, how would you describe yourself, Jonathan?
Well, I'm the editor of Brexit Central.
Oh, so you're the editor of Brexit. Sorry, Ben Lowry, he's the deputy editor of the Belfast Newsletter, excuse me. We have Senator Neil Richmond, he's the Brexit spokesperson for Fine Gael, Ireland's ruling party. Jennifer Kavanagh is the law lecturer at the Waterford Institute of Technology, and Ray Bassett, former Irish ambassador to Canada. Thank you all very much for joining us here. So let me start with some of the quotes from the newspapers today in Britain. Your Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Kavanagh, has been described in the most, Varadkar has been described in the most extraordinary language. The Sun newspaper called him, I think, a Boy Scout. Someone else said he was arrogant. There was a reckless miscalculation when he put down his red line over saying we cannot move on to the next stage of talks if there is no written guarantee about not having a hard border. Jennifer, what's your response to these comments?
Well, the main issue is that the border has been so troublesome from the time that it was actually created in the first instance. And now with it being an issue with Brexit, are we going to have a hard Brexit or a hard border, soft border, almost like an egg? Are we going to have a medium well-done border at this stage? And when you look back on it, there's issues like the Foyle estuary, which still haven't been sorted since partition. So you have an area of land where they're not even quite sure where the boundaries actually are, and then you're going to stick another heavy border on top of that.
But when you hear this sort of incendiary language in the British press, and indeed from some British politicians, I mean, Nick Timothy, formerly the closest advisor to the Prime Minister, said today that he'd made a disastrous miscalculation by putting down this red line. What's your response?
Well, journalists are entitled to write what they want to write within the...
And politicians?
Exactly, within the boundaries of defamation law. But at the end of the day, Leo Varadkar has a position to fight for, and that's to try and get the best deal that there is for the Irish that are crossing the border day to day. People are trading across the border between north and south. There has to be some degree of certainty as to what's going on.
Jonathan Isaby, were these newspapers and politicians right to use that kind of language today?
Well, I certainly think the Taoiseach has massively overplayed his hand. And actually his behaviour has been rather odd, because for most of this year, his words and rhetoric have been very warm towards the British government, who have been saying throughout this year there won't be a hard border. The Belfast Agreement will be enshrined in the negotiation and the end agreement with the European Union. And yet it was kind of 3 weeks ago that the Taoiseach suddenly started to up the ante about this hard border. Theresa May has said throughout there will not be a hard border. There will only be a hard border if Ireland decides to put one up.
With respect, Jonathan, that's a ridiculous comment. The Taoiseach has been consistent, as has his predecessor, Enda Kenny. Ireland set out long before the Brexit referendum. We must put this on the table. We didn't want Brexit. We didn't choose it. It's a decision of the British people, which we respect wholly. But we've been consistent since the referendum that there's top three negotiating issues before we move to phase 2, one of which is the situation on the island of Ireland. And consistently through the process, we've said we're prepared to move to phase 2 whenever the British government provides us with the necessary detail. They have yet to do so. We've missed one deadline in October, and it's understandable that we just are getting slightly frustrated. We want to move on to phase 2, and we're not going to be pushed into it without the detail.
But you can't move on to phase 2 about the trade unless you know what the situation is on the border. These issues are all intertwined.
Then why did the British government agree at the outset with the European Commission negotiation task force?
Dare I say it?
No, this is let me finish my
goodwill towards the European Union.
And the European Union and the Irish government has shown extreme goodwill to a government who's made a decision that affects us more than actually affects the British citizens and the people of Europe. We don't want this. We're dealing with the mess of it. We're very clear. We will move on to phase 2, but we have to be quite clear that we need the detail. We haven't had the detail. We've had a lovely speech. We've had a position paper. We need the detail, and hopefully that'll come over the weekend.
Let's get the union's view from Ben Lowry.
Well, I don't think that if the Irish government is going to play hardball, and it is playing hardball, it can get upset at commentary and at angry reaction. I think it's a tactical choice for them whether or not they want to play hardball. They're saying that they're not going to use a veto and that they have the support of the rest of the EU. If they have the support of the rest of the EU, then that's a problem for the UK. But I want to emphasise how hardline the Irish government is in this. I was at a speech last week in Belfast by Simon Coveney, who's now Leo Varadkar's deputy. And he said that they wouldn't accept checks at the border, they wouldn't accept checks away from the border, and they wouldn't accept checks, for example, in farmyards. So that's quite explicitly saying that no matter how much the British government tries to alleviate the problem, it won't accept it. I think his words were, "We won't stand for it." So he's creating a situation where unionists in London are going to say, well, if you want a border in the Irish Sea, we won't stand for that.
We said we wanted a border.
Let's bring in Nicola Byrne. You represent industry, you represent business. When you hear politicians or political commentators talk like this, does that fill you with optimism?
Well, I'm a bit dismayed that the facts aren't the facts. And this morning, even on our national radio, we have members of politics giving out that our biggest trading partner is the UK, when that's just simply not true. And while the border is hugely important, we only trade 14% of our exports with the UK.
14%?
14%.
1-4?
1-4.
And most of the rest goes to the EU?
No, 29% goes to America, and the rest then is travelled around the world.
So
88% of our exports are foreign direct investment companies. We don't trade beef, beer and butter. We trade high-grade fine chemicals. We trade services. We trade tech. Half the chips in the world are made here in Ireland. Every computer in the UK has probably had a computer chip from Ireland.
And so are you saying that because you trade 14% with the UK
yes.
and more with other people,
yes.
that allows you, that puts you in a better position to draw the red line that Leo Varadkar's drawing right now?
Ireland is now, we are Europe. We're not Ireland. And you're negotiating with Ireland as if we're just some small, tiny little country, which we are, compared to the Great Britain that is next door to us.
Let's go to a former Irish ambassador to Canada. So
I think the first thing we need to do is de-escalate the rhetoric, and a lot of the rhetoric's not helpful, but there's lies, damn lies in statistics. Okay, we export between 14 and 16% by value of our goods to the United Kingdom. It's actually almost 40% by volume. So it is, you can put it all around whatever way you like, but it's very, very important relationship, and it's important that we nurture that relationship. And I'm a bit dismayed at how it has come apart, because in these negotiations, we actually have a common goal, which is we don't want a border and we want the freest possible trade across the Irish Sea. So let's try and work on what we've got in common rather than start, insulting each other or issuing ultimata.
Is Ireland disrespecting the democratic will of the British people as expressed in the referendum, Jennifer?
Of course we're not. I mean, The people of the UK voted for Brexit. We all have our own opinions on that particular standpoint, but that is the vote. That is what the majority of the people in the UK want. It might be useful to give them maybe another opportunity to look at it when we actually know the terms of what's going on.
But Jonathan, do you agree with that? I mean, or do you feel that your will is being disrespected?
I think that when the message came from Dublin that there had to be Northern Ireland within the customs union for things to work, I think people felt that was inappropriate.
What about our will, Jonathan? What about our will? The European Union. There are different aspects now that you're pulling out of.
Our will to protect the Good Friday Agreement, our will to stay within the European Union, our will to make sure that our relationship with the UK rightly stays the closest possible relationship. You've made this decision. We haven't. You have yet to come with proposals about what Brexit will look like, what the border will look like. We're now in December. We missed the deadline in October, and rhetoric with respect from unionist politicians such as Sammy Wilson and Lord Mulroney is extremely unhelpful, using racist slurs to our Prime Minister. We've been very, very direct and throughout the process.
Okay, well, let's just get a response from a unionist. What do you think, Ben? Racist, inflammatory rhetoric?
Well, I mean, you're talking about one or two individuals.
I know. Sammy Wilson isn't just one or two individuals. He's one of the leading members of the DUP. He's one of 10 people that support the Conservative government, making remarks at the stage at the DUP party conference.
Yeah.
Lord Mulroney is a different example. I know I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but you know what I mean. That doesn't help. And then everyone's trying to accuse that we're trying to push through United Ireland by stealth and all that. We're not.
I actually think this is an important point about what's really going on. What's really going on is that there is a view in Scotland amongst Scottish nationalists, and there's a view amongst nationalists in Ireland, that Brexit doesn't have legitimacy in those two places. It is a problem that it didn't get a majority in those two places. But I look at it the other way round. One of the astonishing things to me about Brexit is that there wasn't that much divergence between the countries. England was a little bit more than 50% in favour. Wales was a little bit more than 50% in favour. Scotland was almost 40% in favour of Brexit, and Northern Ireland was well over 40%, almost 50% in Brexit. In other words, across the UK, there was a very high level of scepticism. It's a pity that there wasn't a majority in those countries. And I think what's actually happening with Dublin is that it's thinking that there is a sense that it's a move away. We've Graham Gudgeon, a former advisor to David Trimble, writing in tomorrow's paper, newsletter, saying that it is a move away from the gradual long-term trend towards United Ireland if it works.
Do you believe that, by the way?
No, I think the biggest problem for trade at the moment is that politics is the person who's supposed to clear the path for trade. And I had said to Jonathan
earlier, working the other way around.
It's actually working the other way around at the moment. And business is going to do what business needs to do to protect itself. And that is not in any of our interest. We have to work closely together. Trade is to protect people and bring them out of poverty. This in-house political fighting has got to end. We've got to focus on a win-win. And we're not anywhere near it as this rhetoric just keeps continuing. We have to keep that border protected because we can't go back to bandit days. The only reason it's important is we have farmers, we have food. As Ray said, it accounts for an awful lot of jobs on that border. Our businesses, our members are on that border. They take staff from one side of it, they take supply chain from the other. We cannot have it back as a border. So it is vital to trade.
This trade issue is so important, and this is why the Irish government should be pushing for phase 2 of the talk so that we can talk about trade
If you have a border with respect, and you don't deal with customs, you don't deal with regulatory convergence, how can you talk about trade? So you want to move ahead. The UK government agreed to this process. The UK government are now trying to force ahead of it. We have agreed there's 3 issues: citizens' rights, the bill, and the situation on the island of Ireland. We need to get significant progress on that.
And
we have not got that.
If we can move to a full free trade deal between the EU and the UK, then
we want what we have at the moment, which is
let's bring Jennifer. Hang on a minute, Jonathan. Jennifer, is there a legal framework that you can envisage with your legal mind that would actually make this work, that could square this circle?
The problem is there is so little concrete information coming from both sides that if you want to look at it with some sort of legal eye, you need to have some idea of the facts that are coming from both sides. And there actually isn't anything, as in there's a halfway house that we might be able to meet here. You're hearing things like electronic border tags, but then they'll be taken off the table. So for business, for law, for politics, everything, we need to have some idea of where there can be a halfway house in this to actually move on for everyone.
Here's another solution. Ray Bassett, you wrote in an article quite recently that I read that actually Ireland should do what it did back in '74 when it joined with Britain. It should also leave with Britain. Yeah. And Irexit, I think you call it.
Yeah, well, I think in Irish society we've had a lot of sacred cows, and there's been a lot of deference in that. And in Ireland, it was almost sacrilegious to question the EU. Now, there's no doubt that the membership of the European Union has been very beneficial for Ireland, particularly.
So, are you serious about this possibility of leaving?
But the balance is changing as the European Union changes, and as our circumstances, particularly, if there's going to be a hard border, there's going to be a no deal, then we have to look very seriously at the advantages and disadvantages. And also remember, our net contribution to the European Union has been estimated next year as probably 500 million. So our bill is going way, way up, and the advantages are shrinking. So we've got to look at when we reach the tipping point.
Okay, who's going to join Ray Bassett to leave the EU?
Absolutely not.
Nicola?
No, absolutely not. In fact, Ireland is so well positioned at the moment because with the walls coming up in the States, with Brexit being an immigration issue, the only place in Ireland that we're going to gain from is all those jobs because we have borders that are open. We are centre of the universe. Our Taoiseach was actually right. We are an island at the centre of the universe. We have everything to gain by staying in Europe and very little to lose at this point.
When you were on your knees during the financial crisis,
yes,
the Germans came for you and the French came for you,
and the English.
Not everyone was happy about it. The Brits helped you out with 7 billion quid.
And guess what? We took the austerity. But we took the austerity, and the business. Everybody.
But not everyone is happy about being at the mercy of France and Germany in the EU. They want Britain on your side.
We trade openly.
Important. This is the sort of rhetoric that came through the United Kingdom for the last 40 years that led to Brexit, because it's rhetoric that went unchallenged. Everyone says you're at the mercy of some Franco-German alliance, as if there's no equality in the European Union. And unfortunately,
so you trust the Germans and the French?
Yes.
I trust
the Brits
the 26 other member states, because ultimately the United Kingdom have made the decision to leave. There's a reason, Ray, that 85 to 90% of the Irish population are currently in favour of Remain. They're the highest numbers in the EU, just short of Luxembourg, because it has been wholly beneficial to this country. As you mentioned, trade at the moment, the UK is worth 12%. It was 60% in 1973 when we joined.
Let me ask just one question to Ben. Now, we asked the DUP to come on the programme. They couldn't send anyone, so we have you as a unionist writer here. Today, the DUP more or less, said quite clearly to Theresa May, if you don't support us on this, if you give in to the Irish, then we will pull the plug on this government in London. Do they mean that?
Well, our emerging front page tomorrow is Sammy Wilson MP, who is strongly pro-Brexit, essentially saying that. But I'm wondering whether there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't able to hear your interview with Gary Gibbon, but the Times report this morning was talking about convergence in some areas. I'd want to know what that is, want to know what the constitutional implications are. One thing's very clear. Northern Ireland can't stay in the single market and the customs union. That would certainly mean a border in the Irish Sea. And it would be the move towards Irish unity, which very many people on this island understandably want.
Okay.
Well, can I just...
All right, just very quickly.
Very quickly, we already have a foreign nationals customs in our two airports. We have Shannon and we have Dublin, and we both have US immigration sitting in the middle of that. We're the only people in the world that aren't connected to mainland America to have that. We are not opposed to trade taking really creative solutions. We just haven't seen any, and it's really important for trade to have that. Let's be creative. Let's work together a little bit harder.
Everyone hold your thoughts. We're going to have a short break, but we'll be back here in Dublin in a few seconds. Just under a minute to talk about the Anglo-Irish Agreement and the implications for that. To Dublin and the Glass Palace of the Convention Centre and my panel here. Just a few seconds ago we were talking about all the implications of Brexit for you, for all of you. Let's talk specifically, actually before we talk about the Good Friday Agreement, I want to just get back to the DUP threatening to pull the plug on the government in London. Neil, what would your response be to that?
I think it's a very reckless line to make. The DUP are convinced that we're trying to achieve a united Ireland through stealth. We're not. We gave up that aim when we removed Articles 2 and 3 from our Constitution. We just want to make sure that the situation on the island of Ireland remains as positive as it is at the moment.
But I think there is a sense that the DUP feel that the Government of Ireland is trying to dictate exactly how things should be in Northern Ireland.
If we had an executive in Northern Ireland, it would really help to have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that anyway, because Articles 2 and 3 have reunification based on consent from both Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there is no way that you can take Northern Ireland by stealth. That just cannot happen.
But let's face it, the DUP's never had it this good, so they're probably not going to do this, are they? Ben?
Well, I would have thought that, look at it the other way around, the government isn't going to want to do anything to alienate the DUP. I was at the DUP conference recently, and the one thing that there is an absolute determination amongst DUP and Conservative MPs is to avoid a general election.
Okay, let's talk about the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, the Good Friday Agreement was conceived very much on the assumption that Britain and Ireland would remain members of the European Union. That is now no longer the case. Does this imperil the Good Friday Agreement?
I see absolutely no reason why it should, not least because the British government have said that keeping the Good Friday Agreement will be part of the exit agreement. They agree with the European Union. And the Good Friday Agreement was not a creature of the European Union. I mean, if anything, America had more involvement in bringing the parties together and bringing peace to this island.
Jennifer, in the preamble, it mentions membership of the European Union. And another part of that is the willingness and the fact that the Conservatives want to remove the European Convention on Human Rights, which I know is separate from the European Union, but it is also part of a continuing narrative about removing European elements into the English legislative process. And the problem with that is that is a common human rights standard for both Ireland and the UK, which is underpinning the Good Friday Agreement, which could be up for renegotiation.
Let's be really clear. Is anyone here genuinely worried that if this thing isn't sorted out properly, if we don't find the right language and the right solution, that the troubles could start again?
Yes, 100%.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Ben?
Well, I think there's always a small risk of the trouble starting again. But
does this increase that risk?
I think one of the problems about talking about a return to violence is this. The dissidents are already, there's some very, very violent people out there. And we need to look at it the other way. If that small number of people do return to violence, we want to see cross-border cooperation. All this talk about Brexit and so on, an absolute determination to crush that. We've been there before. We went through a deal that was unpalatable to many of us. In the post-9/11 age, I hope we're all agreeing that terrorism is not going to in any way, even influencing things from the sidelines, have an impact.
Trade will be so impacted if that happens. So it's in no one's interest.
Okay,
there's two clear threats.
I was part of the Irish government.
You'll agree quickly, I've got one last question for all of you.
There's two clear threats to the Good Friday Agreement. If we don't get an agreement in relation to customs, that means we need the infrastructure, be it sensors on the ground, and both. And then the second thing is what impact it will have on, indeed, intelligence sharing amongst the European Union police forces.
I would say that one of the great achievements of the agreement was essentially to remove the kind of water where these people who were causing difficulties were swimming in. If we create the circumstances again, particularly in the border area, then we're endangering. I don't like anyone to predict that the troubles start again, but we're certainly creating conditions which will make it more easier for it to start.
Okay, hang on a minute.
But
final question.
It's not just a security issue. You don't.
Final question to all of you. Who thinks here there'll be a deal by the time we have the summit on the 14th of December? Deal?
Yes.
Deal?
I tend to think that there will. I certainly hope so.
Yes
or
no?
Outrageous if Dublin. I think there will.
Okay. Deal?
I'm not quite sure about
Not quite sure. Neil?
Yes, if London actually provides detail.
Jonathan?
Yes, there will be a deal.
There will be a deal. Nicola?
Yes.
So actually, there will be a deal. There will be a deal on the border. All this sound and fury, we'll get a deal on the border.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. Thank you very much. It's going to be really interesting in the next few days and weeks. Ray, Ben, Jennifer, Neil, Jonathan and Nicola. I haven't got time to do your full titles, but it's been an absolute joy to be sitting here with you in the Glass Palace at the Convention Centre in Dublin. And thanks to all of you for watching. This is one of the most crucial issues that has come up in Brexit. Who would have known it would get this fiery?